Millionaire CEO said, "Bring me the real architect." Everyone froze when the janitor raised her hand. The silence in the Sterling Innovations boardroom was so profound it hummed, a tangible weight pressing down on the polished mahogany table, on the hushed, terrified faces of the executives, on the very air. Outside the panoramic windows, the New York skyline glittered, oblivious to the impending implosion within. Elias Sterling, the Titan himself, stood at the head of the table, his gaze like a laser, sweeping across the room. His voice, usually a calm, measured baritone, was now a low, dangerous rumble. "I ask for the real architect," he repeated, each word a hammer blow. "The one who can fix this. The one who understands what we're building, not just what's on paper. Bring them to me. Now." A tremor went through the room. Architects, senior designers, project managers. They all shifted uneasily, their eyes darting, none daring to meet his gaze. A bead of sweat traced a path down the temple of Julian Thorne, the lead architect, who looked as if he might spontaneously combust. The massive, holographic projection of the Ascent Tower, Sterling's crowning glory, shimmered ominously in the center of the room, its digital skeleton revealing the catastrophic flaw that had brought them all to this precipice. Then, a quiet rustle near the back door. Every head whipped around. Elara Vance, in her faded blue janitor's uniform, her hair pulled back in a neat, unassuming bun, had just finished wiping down the last corner of the room. She held a damp cloth in one hand, a spray bottle in the other. Her eyes, usually downcast, were now fixed on the holographic tower, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. Elias Sterling's gaze, sharp and unforgiving, landed on her. "You," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Did you hear me?" Ilara's hand, the one holding the damp cloth, slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to rise. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Julian Thorne's jaw dropped. The other architects stared, their faces a mixture of disbelief and outright horror. The CEO, his eyes narrowed, watched her, a single eyebrow slowly arching in a silent challenge. The silence stretched, agonizing, filled only by the frantic beat of everyone's hearts. Who was this woman, this ghost in the periphery, daring to claim a title that belonged to the elite? What hidden truth was about to shatter their carefully constructed world? Keep watching, subscribe, and don't forget to like our video. The fluorescent lights of Sterling Innovations hummed with a sterile, indifferent efficiency, a stark contrast to the vibrant chaos Elara Vance once knew. Now, her world was defined by the rhythmic squeak of her mop, the faint scent of lemon disinfectant, and the quiet dignity she carried through the polished hallways. Every morning, before the city truly woke, Elara was already there, a silent sentinel gliding through the empty offices, wiping down desks that would soon be cluttered with ambitious blueprints and gleaming screens. She was a ghost in the machine, a whisper in the grand symphony of corporate ambition. Most employees barely registered her presence, a fleeting blue blur in their peripheral vision. And that was exactly how Elara wanted it. Anonymity was her shield, her sanctuary. It kept her safe, kept her hidden. And most importantly, it kept Leo safe. Leo, her son. He was the sun, moon, and stars in her quiet universe. A bright, curious 9-year-old with a mop of unruly brown hair and eyes that sparkled with an insatiable hunger for knowledge. He loved building things, intricate Lego castles, elaborate cardboard cities, even fantastical contraptions made from recycled kitchen scraps. His latest obsession was a miniature suspension bridge, meticulously crafted from popsicle sticks and string, spanning the gap between his bed and his dresser. He'd spent hours on it, his tongue poking out in concentration, his small brow furrowed in thought. Elara would watch him, a soft, wistful ache in her chest. She'd see the same spark, the same fierce dedication, the same intuitive understanding of structure and balance that she once possessed. It was a mirror, a painful echo of a life she'd deliberately buried under layers of dust and silence. Her apartment, a cramped but meticulously clean 2-bedroom walk-up in a less-than-glamorous part of Queens, was their haven. It smelled of homemade bread, old books, and Leo's endless supply of craft glue. After her shift, Elara would rush home, shedding her uniform for comfortable jeans and a worn t-shirt. They'd eat dinner, usually something simple and nourishing, and then she'd help Leo with his homework, patiently explaining fractions or the intricacies of the solar system. Later, as he drifted off to sleep, she'd sit by his bed, tracing the lines of his small, peaceful face, a silent promise forming on her lips. I will protect you. Always. The days at Sterling Innovations blurred into a monotonous rhythm. Dust, polish, empty coffee cups, overflowing bins. Yet, sometimes, a flicker of her past would break through the carefully constructed facade. She'd be cleaning a desk in the architecture department, and a stray blueprint, left carelessly open, would catch her eye. A complex structural diagram, a detailed elevation, a rendering of a sleek, modern facade. Her gaze would linger, her mind unconsciously analyzing the lines, the stresses, the flow. She'd see the elegant solutions, or sometimes the subtle, almost imperceptible flaws. A slight miscalculation in load bearing, an inefficient use of space, a missed opportunity for natural light. She'd feel a familiar surge, a forgotten language stirring within her, before she'd quickly shake it off, her heart thumping a little too fast. No, not anymore. That life is over. One Tuesday morning, the usual corporate buzz in the Sterling Innovations building escalated into a fever pitch. Whispers turned into excited chatter, then into outright declarations. The Ascent Tower. It was more than just a project. It was a statement. A 1,000-foot glass and steel behemoth destined to pierce the Manhattan sky, a monument to Sterling's ambition and architectural prowess. It was going to be the tallest residential building on the East Coast, a marvel of modern engineering and design. The entire architecture department was abuzz. Julian Thorne, the lead architect, a man known for his sharp suits and even sharper wit, walked with an extra swagger in his step. His team, usually a mix of harried and focused individuals, now radiated a collective energy, a blend of excitement and intense pressure. Models of the Ascent Tower, initially small and abstract, grew in size and detail, dominating entire sections of the office floor. Ilara, pushing her cleaning cart, would often pause, ostensibly to empty a bin, but secretly to admire the intricate models, her fingers itching to trace the delicate curves and angles. She heard snippets of conversations, discussions about innovative materials, sustainable design, wind resistance, and the sheer audacity of the structure. She saw the late nights, the takeout containers piling up, the weary but determined faces of the architects. They were pouring their lives into this, a testament to their passion. And Ilara, from her invisible vantage point, understood that passion better than anyone. One evening, as the last of the architects finally trickled out, leaving behind a battlefield of crumpled papers and half-eaten sandwiches, Ilara began her routine. The office was quiet now, save for the hum of the servers and the distant city sounds. She was wiping down Julian Thorne's desk, a mountain of blueprints spread across it, illuminated by the glow of his large monitor. He had forgotten to lock his screen, and a detailed 3D rendering of the Ascent Tower rotated slowly, majestically. Ilara's gaze was drawn to it involuntarily. Her eyes scanned the structure, moving from the sweeping facade to the intricate internal skeleton. She saw the innovative core, the cantilevered sections, the daring spire. It was magnificent. But then, her eyes snagged on something. A subtle anomaly. A series of stress points in the central support structure where the dynamic load distribution seemed off. It wasn't immediately obvious, a nuanced interaction between the unique geometry of the building and the proposed material strength. It was the kind of flaw that wouldn't show up in preliminary simulations, but could become catastrophic under specific, extreme conditions, say, a rare combination of high winds and seismic activity. Her breath hitched. She leaned closer, her heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. No, it couldn't be. She traced the lines with her finger, not touching the screen, but following the invisible pathways of force and resistance in her mind. The flaw was there, small, insidious, and potentially devastating. It was a ghost in the machine, a silent killer waiting for the right moment to strike. A cold dread settled in her stomach. This wasn't just a design oversight, it was a fundamental miscalculation at the very heart of the building's stability. She knew, with chilling certainty, that if this wasn't addressed, the Ascent Tower, Sterling's crowning glory, could become its greatest tragedy. She straightened up, her hand trembling slightly as she picked up her damp cloth. The familiar lemon scent did nothing to calm her racing thoughts. She was just a janitor. What could she do? Who would listen? The very idea was absurd. Yet, the image of Leo, building his popsicle stick bridge with such earnest focus, flashed in her mind. She thought of the thousands of lives that would eventually inhabit that towering structure. Her eyes drifted back to the screen, to the elegant but fatally flawed design. The hum of the savers seemed to mock her. She felt a familiar, suffocating pressure, the weight of knowledge she couldn't share, of a past she couldn't reveal. But this was different. This wasn't about her secrets anymore. This was about something far, far bigger. She turned off the monitor, plunging the desk into darkness. The floor remained, unseen, unheard, a ticking time bomb. Ilara pushed her cart slowly out of the office, the weight of her secret heavier than any cleaning supply. She had just walked away from a potential disaster, and the silence of the empty hallway screamed with the enormity of what she knew. The silence of the empty hallway, which had screamed with the enormity of what Ilara knew, followed her home. It clung to her like the scent of disinfectant, seeping into the worn fabric of her uniform, into the very marrow of her bones. That night, sleep was a cruel stranger. Every time she closed her eyes, the holographic image of the Ascent Tower, its elegant lines now twisted into a monstrous symbol of impending disaster, flashed behind her eyelids. The stress points, like tiny, invisible cracks, spiderwebbed across the central support, mocking her with their silent promise of collapse. She tossed and turned, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen a stark contrast to the frantic drumbeat of her own heart. Leo, nestled in his bed in the next room, breathed softly, innocently. His peaceful slumber was a fragile thing, protected by the thin walls of their apartment and the fierce, unyielding shield of her silence. But what if that silence was the very thing that would shatter his world? The thought was a jolt, a cold splash of water. She imagined the news reports, the catastrophic images, the lives lost, all because she, Ilara Vance, had chosen to remain a ghost. The weight of that potential future pressed down on her, suffocating. She was just a janitor. Who would believe her? Who would even listen to a woman who cleaned toilets and emptied trash when the esteemed Julian Thorne, a man with a string of successful projects and a reputation for brilliance, stood at the helm? The very idea was ludicrous. They would laugh. Or worse, they would dismiss her, perhaps even brand her as unstable, a disgruntled employee trying to stir trouble. Her anonymity, her shield, would become her cage. The next morning, the city felt heavier, the air thicker with unspoken dread. The usual morning rush, the blare of car horns, the hurried footsteps of commuters, it all seemed amplified, each sound a reminder of the bustling, oblivious lives that would one day populate the Ascent Tower. Ilara moved through her routine at Sterling Innovations with a newfound, unsettling awareness. Every floor she cleaned, every office she entered, felt like a stage set for a tragedy. In the architecture department, the buzz around the Ascent Tower had only intensified. Julian Thorne, ever the showman, was holding court by the large model, gesturing expansively as he explained some intricate detail to a group of junior architects, their faces rapt with admiration. Ilara, pushing her cart past them, caught a fragment of his booming voice. The sheer ingenuity of the core structure, designed to withstand even a Category 4 hurricane. A fortress, gentlemen. A true landmark. A fortress. Ilara's stomach churned. He was so confident, so utterly convinced of his own genius. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. She wanted to scream, to rip the model from its stand and point out the insidious flaw, to shatter his smug certainty. But the words died in her throat, choked by the use of silence, by the fear for Leo. She remembered the day she had decided to become Ilara Vance, the janitor. It was a cold, rainy afternoon, years ago, when she'd packed a small bag, taken Leo's hand, and walked away from everything she knew. From the accolades, the prestigious projects, the dizzying heights of her former career. From the betrayal. That life had nearly cost her everything, nearly cost her Leo. She had vowed then, with a fierce, desperate intensity, that she would never again draw attention to herself, never again risk their fragile peace. Anonymity was not just a choice, it was a lifeline. But now, That lifeline felt like a noose. Days bled into weeks. The Ascent Tower moved from the design phase to the initial stages of groundbreaking. Construction crews began to mobilize on the designated plot downtown, a massive, fenced-off area that would soon host the foundations of the skyscraper. News channels ran segments on the project, hailing it as a triumph of modern engineering, a testament to New York's enduring spirit. Each report was a fresh stab of anxiety for Ilara. She found herself becoming increasingly distracted. At home, Leo noticed. "Mom, are you okay?" he'd ask, his small hand reaching for hers across the dinner table. "You seem quiet." "Just tired, sweetie," she'd murmur, forcing a smile. "Long days at work." He'd nod, seemingly satisfied, but his bright eyes held a flicker of concern. Leo was too perceptive for his own good. He inherited that from her, too. One evening, while cleaning Elias Sterling's private office, a cavernous space with floor-to-ceiling windows and a desk the size of a small car, Ilara saw it. A framed photograph prominently displayed on a credenza. It was Elias Sterling, much younger, standing beside a woman with a radiant smile and eyes that held a familiar, intense spark. Ilara froze, her cleaning cloth halfway to the polished surface. The woman was holding a rolled-up blueprint, her arm casually draped around Sterling's shoulder. It was a picture of partnership, of shared triumph. And the woman was her. Not Ilara Vance, the janitor, but Ilara Thorne, the visionary architect, the rising star, the co-founder of Sterling Innovations. The name that had been erased, meticulously scrubbed from the company's official history, from her own life. A gasp escaped her lips, a small, choked sound that echoed in the vast, silent office. Her past, the one she had so painstakingly buried, was not just hidden, it was staring her in the face, framed and acknowledged by the very man she had once trusted implicitly. The man who had, in the end, chosen his ambition over their partnership, over her reputation, over her very identity. The man who had allowed Julian Thorne, his own nephew, to take credit for her groundbreaking designs after she disappeared. A wave of nausea washed over her. She remembered the whispers, the accusations, the public scandal that had driven her into hiding, the fabricated charges, the ruined career, the desperate flight to protect her unborn child from the fallout. She had lost everything, but she had kept Leo safe. And now, the very man who had presided over her professional demise was unknowingly asking her to save his empire. The irony was brutal, a cruel twist of fate. She stared at the photograph, her reflection superimposed on the image of her younger, more vibrant self. The woman in the picture was bold, confident, unafraid. The woman standing there now, in a faded blue uniform, was a shadow. A sudden, sharp pain lanced through her hand. She looked down. Her fingers were clenched so tightly around the spray bottle that her knuckles were white, and the plastic had dug into her palm, leaving a red, angry mark. This wasn't just about the tower anymore. This was about justice, about the truth, about reclaiming a piece of herself she had thought long dead. But the cost would be immense. It would mean tearing down the walls she had built around herself, exposing Leo to the very dangers she had fled. It would mean facing Elias Sterling, facing Julian Thorne, facing the ghosts of her past. She looked at the photograph again, at the confident smile of her younger self. Could she still be that woman? Could she risk everything, again, for a truth that might destroy her? As she finished cleaning the office, the photograph seemed to burn into her mind. She left Sterling's office, the weight of her secret now compounded by the crushing burden of a past that was no longer just hidden, but actively demanding to be seen. The silence of the night was no longer just about the floor in the tower. It was about the deafening roar of a buried identity threatening to erupt. The roar of a buried identity threatening to erupt echoed in Ilara's ears as she stepped out of Sterling's office. It wasn't just the hum of the city anymore. It was the clamor of a past demanding its due, a past she had meticulously, painfully, tried to erase. The photograph on Elias Sterling's credenza had ripped open old wounds she thought had long since scarred over. But they were fresh, bleeding with the bitterness of betrayal and the lingering sting of injustice. She walked through the deserted hallways, her cleaning cart a silent companion, the weight of her uniform suddenly suffocating. Every step felt heavy, each breath a struggle. The decision, the impossible choice that had haunted her for weeks, now loomed larger, more terrifying than ever. Save the tower, expose herself, and risk Leo's safety, or remain hidden, and let a potential catastrophe unfold, knowing she could have prevented it? The image of Leo, his bright eyes full of innocent trust, building his small, sturdy bridge, warred with a chilling vision of the ascent tower crumbling. Her son, her everything, was the reason she had vanished, the reason she lived this shadow existence. His well-being was paramount. But what kind of mother would she be if she stood by and watched a disaster unfold, knowing she held the key to preventing it? The moral dilemma was a vice tightening around her heart. She arrived home, the early morning light barely filtering through the grimy windows of her apartment. Leo was still asleep, a peaceful lump under his dinosaur-themed comforter. Ilara stood by his bed, watching him, her hand hovering over his soft hair. He stirred, a small sigh escaping his lips. A wave of fierce protectiveness washed over her, so potent it brought tears to her eyes. "Mom," he mumbled, his eyes fluttering open. "You're home early." "Just finished up," she whispered, forcing a smile. She sat on the edge of his bed, gently stroking his hair. "Go back to sleep, sleepyhead." He burrowed deeper into his pillow, but his hand reached out, finding hers and squeezing it. That simple gesture, that innocent trust, solidified her resolve. She couldn't let fear paralyze her. She couldn't let her past define her inaction. Over the next few days, a silent war raged within Ilara. She continued her janitorial duties, but her eyes were sharper, her observations more acute. She watched Julian Thorne, the man who had effortlessly stepped into her shoes, claiming her designs as his own. He moved with an air of entitlement, his laughter echoing a little too loudly in the hallways. She saw the deference of his team, the unquestioning acceptance of his authority. It fueled a quiet fire within her, a simmering resentment that had been dormant for years. She started spending her lunch breaks in the company library, a dusty, rarely used space filled with old architectural journals and technical manuals. She wasn't looking for anything specific. She was simply immersing herself in the language of her past, reacquainting herself with the intricate details of structural engineering, material science, and advanced design principles. It was like a forgotten muscle, slowly reawakening, stretching, remembering its strength. She found herself sketching diagrams on napkins, scribbling equations on the back of old invoices, her mind racing with solutions, with alternative approaches to the Ascent Tower's flawed core. One afternoon, a junior architect, a bright-eyed young woman named Chloe, accidentally spilled coffee all over a set of blueprints for a smaller, less critical project. Panic etched her face. Ilara, who was cleaning nearby, watched as Chloe frantically tried to blot the dark stain, only making it worse. "Oh no! Oh no! Mr. Thorne is going to kill me," Chloe wailed, her voice trembling. Ilara hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward. "Let me see," she said, her voice softer than usual. She took the ruined blueprint. Her eyes scanned the damaged section, and then, almost instinctively, her mind filled in the missing lines, the obscure dimensions. "It's a simple load-bearing wall," she murmured, more to herself than to Chloe. "You can redraw it. The critical stress point is here." She pointed to an invisible spot on the paper, "and the reinforcement should be angled slightly inward, not straight up. It will distribute the weight more evenly." Chloe stared at her, her mouth agape. How did you know that?" Ilara quickly pulled her hand back, a flush creeping up her neck. "Just seen a lot of blueprints over the years," she mumbled, reverting to her usual quiet demeanor. "You pick things up." Chloe, still looking bewildered, nodded slowly. "Right. Thanks, Ilara." She took the blueprint, a new spark of understanding in her eyes. Ilara quickly retreated, her heart pounding. It was a small slip, a momentary lapse in her carefully constructed disguise, but it felt monumental. The ghost was showing signs of life. The next day, a general meeting was called for all department heads and project leads. Elias Sterling himself would be presiding. The air in the building was thick with anticipation. Ilara, pushing her cart through the executive floor, overheard snippets of conversation. The Ascent Tower was facing a critical review. A major investor had raised concerns about the structural integrity, citing an independent preliminary analysis that hinted at potential issues. Julian Thorne was reportedly furious, dismissing the concerns as baseless. Ilara felt a cold knot of dread in her stomach. This was it. The moment of truth was approaching, faster than she had anticipated. The universe, it seemed, was forcing her hand. That evening, after Leo was asleep, Ilara sat at her small kitchen table, a single lamp casting a warm glow on her worn hands. She pulled out a hidden box from under her bed, a small, wooden chest, intricately carved, that contained the last remnants of her old life. Inside, beneath faded letters and a few old photographs, lay a single, pristine architectural award, its metallic surface gleaming faintly in the dim light. It was the Sterling Innovations Young Architect of the Year award, given to her years ago, before everything fell apart. Her name, Ilara Thorne, was engraved on it. She ran her fingers over the smooth, cool metal, a wave of memories washing over her. The excitement, the recognition, the boundless potential. The partnership with Elias Sterling, which had once felt like a dream. The shared vision, the late nights spent brainstorming, the feeling of being on the cusp of something truly great. And then, the slow, insidious erosion of trust, the subtle shifts in power, Julian Thorne's growing presence, and finally, the brutal, public betrayal that had shattered her career and her life. A single tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't just sadness, it was a fierce, burning anger. Anger at what had been taken from her, at the injustice, at the years she had spent hiding. She picked up a pen and a blank sheet of paper. Her hand, which had trembled holding the spray bottle, now moved with a newfound certainty. She began to sketch not a rough outline, but precise, confident lines. The ascent tower, its flawed core, and then, next to it, her proposed solution. A revised load distribution, a modified bracing system, an elegant, almost invisible adjustment that would redistribute the immense forces, making the structure not just stable, but truly resilient. It was a design born of years of experience, of an intuitive understanding that went beyond mere calculations. It was her signature. She worked through the night, the silence of the apartment broken only by the scratching of her pen. When the first rays of dawn touched her window, she leaned back, exhausted but exhilarated. On the table lay a single sheet of paper, covered in intricate diagrams and precise annotations. It was her truth, laid bare. It was the solution. But how to present it? How to make them listen? The thought of facing Elias Sterling, of confronting Julian Thorne, made her stomach clench. The fear for Leo was still there, a constant thrum beneath her skin. But now, it was accompanied by a new, powerful emotion, a fierce determination. She looked at the drawing, then at the award. Ilara Thorne. The name felt foreign on her tongue, yet undeniably hers. The janitor, Ilara Vance, had lived a quiet, safe life. But Ilara Thorne, the architect, had a legacy to reclaim, a wrong to right, and a tower to save. As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across her small apartment, Ilara made her decision. She would go to the meeting. She would find a way. The silence of the night had given way to the roar of her purpose. The battle was about to begin, and she, the unassuming janitor, was about to step onto the battlefield. Her heart hammered, not with fear, but with a terrifying, exhilarating anticipation. The terrifying, exhilarating anticipation that hammered in Ilara's heart was a strange, potent cocktail. It was the fear of exposure, the dread of confronting a past she had painstakingly buried, mingled with the fierce, almost desperate thrill of reclaiming a part of herself she thought was lost forever. The single sheet of paper, covered in her meticulous diagrams and annotations, was tucked securely inside her worn janitor's uniform pocket, a secret weapon against a corporate empire. She left Leo with Mrs. Henderson, their kind, elderly neighbor, under the pretense of an unexpected extra shift. Leo, sensing her unusual tension, clung to her a little longer than usual, his small hand warm in hers. "Be careful, Mom," he'd said, his brow furrowed with a child's intuitive worry. His words were a fresh reminder of the stakes, a heavy weight that settled in her chest. The journey to Sterling Innovations felt different today. The usual anonymity of her commute, the comforting blur of faces and sounds, was replaced by a heightened awareness. Every passerby seemed to stare, every siren seemed to wail a warning. She felt exposed, as if the truth of her identity was radiating from her, a beacon for all to see. It was a stark contrast to the invisible existence she had cultivated for years. When she arrived at the building, the atmosphere was electric. The usual corporate hum had intensified into a low, anxious thrum. Executives, their faces tight with worry, hurried past her, their hushed conversations filled with words like crisis, investor confidence, and structural integrity. The air was thick with unspoken fear, a palpable tension that tightened her own nerves. She made her way to the executive floor, her cleaning cart a familiar shield, a flimsy disguise. The boardroom doors were closed, but the muffled murmur of voices and the occasional raised tone seeped through the thick wood. She knew the meeting had begun. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat urging her forward, yet simultaneously screaming at her to turn back, to run, to hide. Ilara parked her cart discreetly near the back entrance of the boardroom, a spot she often used for quick access during her cleaning rounds. She could hear Elias Sterling's voice, sharp and authoritative, punctuated by the nervous stammering of Julian Thorne. Julian. Sterling's voice cut through the muffled sounds. The independent analysis suggests a fundamental flaw in the core design. Explain this. Explain why we are only discovering this now, weeks after groundbreaking. Julian's response was a flurry of technical jargon, a desperate attempt to deflect and confuse. Mr. Sterling, with all due respect, these are preliminary findings based on incomplete data. Our models show the simulations are conclusive. The structure is sound. His voice, usually so confident, now had a desperate edge. Ilara leaned against the cool wall, her eyes closed for a brief moment. She could see it all in her mind's eye, the holographic projection of the Ascent Tower, the frantic faces of the executives, Julian Thorne's bluster. She knew his simulations were flawed. She knew where the miscalculation lay. It was a subtle interplay of forces, a blind spot in his understanding of her original, more complex design philosophy. A thought, cold and sharp, pierced through her fear. What if she just left? What if she just walked away, let them flounder, let Julian Thorne face the consequences of his own incompetence and deceit? A dark, vengeful part of her whispered that it would be a fitting end for the man who had stolen her life. But then, the image of Leo, and the thousands of innocent lives that would be at risk, flashed before her. No, she couldn't. She wouldn't. She took a deep, shaky breath, her fingers instinctively touching the paper in her pocket. The paper was her truth, her redemption. But revealing it would mean stripping away the layers of protection she had built around herself, exposing herself to the very people who had wronged her. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. The door to the boardroom suddenly burst open. A harried assistant rushed out, his face pale. Mr. Sterling is demanding a full structural review. He wants everyone with any knowledge of the original design in there, immediately. Ilara's breath hitched. This was her chance. Or her undoing. She pushed herself off the wall, her legs feeling strangely heavy. She adjusted her uniform, smoothing down the wrinkles, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of defiance. She walked towards the open door, her cleaning cart still parked innocently nearby. The boardroom was a maelstrom of hushed arguments and frantic whispers. The holographic projection of the Ascent Tower pulsed ominously in the center of the room, its digital skeleton now highlighted with angry red lines, indicating the critical stress points. Elias Sterling stood at the head of the table, his face a mask of barely contained fury. His gaze swept across the room, landing on each architect, each project manager, demanding answers they couldn't provide. I ask for the real architect, he repeated, his voice low and dangerous, each word a hammer blow. The one who can fix this. The one who understands what we're building, not just what's on paper. Bring them to me. Now. The silence that followed was profound, a tangible weight pressing down on everyone. Julian Thorne, his face ashen, looked as if he might crumble. The other architects shifted uneasily, their eyes darting, none daring to meet Sterling's gaze. Ilara had reached the back of the room, almost instinctively moving to her usual position near the door, as if she was simply there to clean. She had just finished wiping down the last corner of the room, her hand holding a damp cloth, a spray bottle in the other. Her eyes, usually downcast, were now fixed on the holographic tower, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. Elias Sterling's gaze, sharp and unforgiving, landed on her. He saw the faded blue uniform, the unassuming bun, the cleaning supplies. He saw the woman who had been a silent fixture in his office for years, a background detail in his grand, ambitious life. "You," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Did you hear me?" The question hung in the air, a challenge. Ilara felt every eye in the room turn to her, 100 pairs of eyes dissecting her, dismissing her. The weight of their disbelief was crushing. The fear for Leo, the memories of her past humiliation, threatened to overwhelm her. Her hand, the one holding the damp cloth, trembled. But then she thought of Leo's trusting eyes, of the thousands of lives that would depend on the integrity of that tower. She thought of the woman in the photograph, the confident architect who had dared to dream big. She thought of the injustice, the years of hidden pain. And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, Ilara's hand began to rise. It was a small movement, barely a twitch, but in the profound silence of the boardroom, it was an earthquake. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Julian Thorne's jaw dropped, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. The other architects stared, their faces a mixture of disbelief and outright stupefaction. Elias Sterling, his eyes narrowed, watched her, a single eyebrow slowly arching in a silent challenge. The silence stretched, agonizing, filled only by the frantic beat of everyone's hearts. The damp cloth slipped from Ilara's fingers, falling to the polished floor with a soft, almost inaudible thud. All eyes were on her, the janitor who had dared to raise her hand. The air crackled with unspoken questions. Who was she? What was she doing? And what would happen next? The answer, she knew, would either shatter her world or finally set her free. The battle for her identity and for the Ascent Tower had just begun. The soft thud of the damp cloth hitting the polished floor echoed like a gunshot in the profound silence of the boardroom. Every pair of eyes, wide with disbelief, was fixed on Ilara. The air crackled with a tension so thick it felt suffocating, each second stretching into an eternity. Elias Sterling's arched eyebrow was a silent, potent question, his gaze piercing, analytical, and utterly devoid of recognition. Julian Thorne, however, was a different story. His ashen face had gone from shock to a dawning, sickening realization. His eyes, fixed on Ilara, held a mixture of terror and a desperate, frantic denial. He knew, or at least, he suspected. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a sickly shade of white. Ilara stood there, exposed, vulnerable. The faded blue uniform suddenly felt like a spotlight, illuminating every insecurity, every fear she had suppressed for years. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her throat was dry, her tongue felt thick. For a fleeting moment, she wanted to retract her hand, to disappear back into the shadows, to pretend this never happened. But the image of the Ascent Tower, its red lines screaming danger, flashed in her mind alongside Leo's innocent, trusting face. She had to do this. For them. For herself. "You," Elias Sterling finally said, his voice low, his eyes still narrowed, studying her as if she were an anomaly, a glitch in his perfectly ordered corporate world. "Are you suggesting you are the Real architect?" The words were laced with incredulity, almost derision. A few executives exchanged bewildered glances, some stifling snickers, others simply shaking their heads in utter bewilderment. Ilara swallowed hard, forcing moisture into her parched throat. Her voice, when it came, was a little shaky, but clear enough to cut through the lingering silence. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. I am." A ripple went through the room. The stifled snickers died. The bewildered glances turned into outright stares. Julian Thorne let out a strangled gasp, a sound like air escaping a punctured tire. He took an involuntary step back, bumping into a chair, which scraped loudly against the floor. Elias Sterling's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes, sharp as ever, held a flicker of something new, curiosity, perhaps, or a hint of annoyance at the disruption. "And your name?" he asked, his voice still calm, but with an underlying steel. Ilara Vance, she replied, using the name she had adopted, the name that was her disguise. She knew it wouldn't be enough. The full truth would have to come. Sterling's gaze hardened. Ilara Vance. I don't recall an Ilara Vance in our architectural department, past or present. Are you perhaps mistaken about the nature of this meeting? His tone was dismissive, an unspoken command for her to retreat, to resume her invisible role. This was it, the moment of truth. She took another deep breath, her gaze meeting his, holding it. The fear was still there, but now, a surge of adrenaline, a cold, hard determination, began to override it. No, Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice gaining strength, losing its tremor. I am not mistaken. And my name is not just Ilara Vance. She reached into her uniform pocket, her fingers closing around the single sheet of paper. She pulled it out, unfolded it with deliberate slowness, and held it up. The intricate diagrams, the precise calculations, the elegant solution to the ascent tower's fatal flaw were visible to everyone. My name, she continued, her voice now steady, clear, and ringing with a quiet authority that silenced every whisper in the room, is Ilara Thorne. The name hung in the air, a ghost from the past, a forgotten echo. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The silence was absolute, heavier than before, filled with the collective shock of recognition. Elias Sterling's face, usually so composed, fractured. His eyes widened, a flicker of something akin to disbelief, then dawning comprehension, then a flash of stark, undeniable shock. He looked from the paper in her hand to her face, then back to the paper, as if trying to reconcile the unassuming janitor with the legendary name. The photograph in his office, the one she had seen, must have flashed through his mind. Julian Thorne, however, reacted with explosive fury. That's impossible, he shrieked, his voice cracking, his face contorted with rage and panic. She's a janitor. This is a trick, a desperate attempt to sabotage us. He lunged forward, as if to snatch the paper from her hand, but a stern look from Sterling stopped him dead in his tracks. Silence, Julian, Elias Sterling commanded, his voice low and dangerous, his eyes never leaving Ilara. He stepped away from the table, slowly, deliberately, and walked towards her. Every eye in the room followed him, then her, then him again. The tension was unbearable. He stopped a few feet from her, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in the faded uniform, the tired lines around her eyes, the quiet strength in her posture. He remembered the woman in the photograph, the brilliant, fiery architect who had been his partner, his protégé. He remembered the scandal, the whispers, the sudden disappearance. And now, here she was, in the unlikeliest of places, in the most critical of moments. Ilara Thorne, he repeated, the name a question, a statement, an accusation. His voice was no longer dismissive, but laced with a complex mix of emotions, surprise, suspicion, and perhaps a hint of something else, something that might have been regret. You've been here all this time. Ilara met his gaze, unflinching. Yes, Mr. Sterling, I have. She held out the paper, offering it to him. And I believe this will explain why I'm here now. Sterling took the paper, his fingers brushing hers. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through Ilara, a strange mix of recognition and raw emotion. He unfolded the paper, his eyes immediately scanning the intricate drawings, the precise calculations. His expression shifted, from shock to intense focus, then to a slow, undeniable understanding. The lines of tension around his mouth softened, replaced by a grim, almost defeated realization. He looked up from the paper, his gaze locking with Julian Thorne's. The look he gave his nephew was chilling, a silent condemnation that spoke volumes. Julian visibly flinched, shrinking under his uncle's gaze. Then, Elias Sterling turned back to Ilara. His eyes, which had once held only power and ambition, now held a flicker of something she hadn't seen in years, respect, and something else, something deeper, more unsettling, a profound sense of guilt. The ascent tower, he said, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes still on the diagrams. It's exactly as you said. The floor is here, And your solution? He looked up at her, his expression a mixture of awe and despair. It's brilliant. It always was. The words hung in the air, a devastating admission, a public acknowledgement of her genius and of his monumental error. The executives in the room, who had been frozen in disbelief, now exchanged stunned glances. The silent understanding rippled through them. The janitor was indeed the real architect, and the man they had trusted, Julian Thorne, was a fraud. Ilara felt a strange mix of triumph and exhaustion. The first hurdle was cleared. They believed her. But the battle was far from over. The truth was out, but the consequences, the full weight of her past, were yet to unfold. The respect in Sterling's eyes was a victory, but the guilt she saw there was a warning. The past was not just returning, it was demanding a reckoning. And the hardest part, she knew, was yet to come. The words, "It's brilliant. It always was," hung in the air, a devastating admission from Elias Sterling. They were a public acknowledgement of Ilara's genius, a stark contrast to the years of silence and erasure. The weight of them settled over the boardroom, heavy with unspoken history. The executives, who moments ago had been stifling snickers, now sat in stunned silence, their faces a tableau of shock, confusion, and dawning understanding. The janitor, the invisible woman, was Ilara Thorne, the legendary architect whose name had been meticulously scrubbed from the company's history. Julian Thorne, however, was not silent. His face, already pale, flushed a mottled red. He let out a strangled cry, a sound of pure, unadulterated panic. "Uncle Elias, you can't believe her. This is absurd. She's clearly unstable. Look at her. She's a janitor. She's trying to ruin us." His voice was high-pitched, desperate, verging on a pathetic whine. He pointed a trembling finger at Ilara, his eyes wild. Elias Sterling didn't even glance at his nephew. His gaze remained fixed on Ilara, then drifted back to the diagrams in his hand. He absorbed every line, every annotation, the undeniable truth of her analysis. The respect in his eyes deepened, but it was now tinged with a profound, almost crushing guilt. He knew the extent of his nephew's deception and the depth of his own complicity in allowing it to happen, in allowing Ilara's name to be tarnished and her career destroyed. "Julian," Sterling said, his voice dangerously quiet, "that's enough." The words were a whip crack, silencing Julian instantly. The younger man recoiled, his face crumpling. The other executives averted their gazes, uncomfortable witnesses to the public unraveling of a carefully constructed lie. Ilara felt a strange mix of vindication and exhaustion. The years of quiet suffering, of biting her tongue, of enduring the injustice, were finally culminating in this moment. It was a bitter victory, tinged with the lingering pain of what she had lost. But it was a victory nonetheless. The truth, finally, was out. The Ascent Tower, Sterling continued, his voice now addressing the entire room, but his eyes still on Ilara, is compromised. The independent analysis was correct, and Ilara Thorne, the original visionary behind this project, has provided the solution. He held up the paper, the diagrams a stark testament to her brilliance. "We will halt all construction immediately. Every single calculation, every single blueprint, will be reviewed against Ilara's proposed revisions. Julian, you will provide all necessary documentation to Ilara, effective immediately." Julian Thorne gasped, a sound of utter defeat. "But, Uncle Elias." "No buts, Julian." Sterling cut him off, his voice cold. "Final. Your involvement in this project, and indeed, your position at Sterling Innovations, is now under review. You are dismissed from this meeting." The pronouncement hung heavy in the air. Julian Thorne, once the golden boy, the heir apparent, was publicly disgraced. He stood frozen for a moment, then slowly, his shoulders slumped, he turned and stumbled out of the boardroom, leaving behind a palpable sense of shock and unease. The remaining executives looked at Ilara with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The silent janitor had just brought down one of their own and revealed herself to be the true architectural genius they had unknowingly dismissed. The power dynamic in the room had shifted irrevocably. Ilara, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins, felt a sudden wave of dizziness. The years of hidden stress, the constant vigilance, the emotional toll of her double life were catching up to her. She swayed slightly, and Elias Sterling, noticing, quickly stepped forward. "Ilara," he said, his voice softer now, tinged with concern. "Are you all right?" She nodded, trying to steady herself. "I'm fine, Mr. Sterling. Just a lot to process." He gestured to an empty chair at the table. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss." As she sat down, the weight of the moment pressed in on her. She was no longer a ghost. She was back in the room, at the table, where she belonged. But the path back was fraught with peril, and the ghosts of her past were not just in the room. They were sitting across from her. "I owe you an explanation," Sterling began, his voice low, his gaze meeting Hayes directly. "And an apology, a profound one." He paused, his eyes searching hers, as if looking for a sign of forgiveness, or perhaps a flicker of the fiery anger he remembered. When you left, after the incident, Julian assured me he could handle the projects. He claimed he had been involved in your designs from the beginning, that he understood your vision. I was blinded by ambition, Ilara, and by family loyalty. I should have looked closer. I should have questioned him. I should have questioned everything. Ilara listened, her face impassive. The incident. That was how he referred to the public scandal that had ruined her. The fabricated charges of intellectual property theft, the whispers of corporate espionage, all orchestrated to discredit her, to force her out, so Julian could take credit for her groundbreaking work. She remembered the relentless media scrutiny, the way her name had been dragged through the mud, the desperate fear for her unborn child. She remembered Elias Sterling, then, standing by, allowing it to happen, prioritizing his company's image and his nephew's advancement over justice. A sharp, painful memory flashed through her mind. It was a cold, sterile conference room, the air thick with tension. Lawyers, stern-faced and unyielding, sat across from her. Elias Sterling was there, too, his face grim, avoiding her gaze. Julian Thorne, looking smug, sat beside him. The accusations flew, baseless and cruel. "Ms. Thorne, your designs for the Skyline Nexus project were clearly derived from proprietary Sterling Innovations research. We have evidence." Ilara had tried to explain, to defend herself, to present her original sketches, her independent research. But her voice, then, had been drowned out by the orchestrated chorus of accusations. She looked at Elias, pleading with her eyes, begging him to intervene, to speak the truth. He had simply looked away, his silence a crushing betrayal. "We are prepared to offer a severance package, Ms. Thorne, in exchange for your immediate resignation and a non-disclosure agreement regarding your involvement with Sterling Innovations." It was a forced exile, a public execution of her career. She had no choice. With Leo growing inside her, she couldn't risk a protracted legal battle that would expose them both. She signed the papers, her hand trembling, her heart breaking. She walked out of that room, not as Ilara Thorne, the architect, but as a ghost, a name erased. The memory was a raw wound, fresh despite the years. She looked at Elias Sterling now, his face etched with something that might have been remorse. Was it genuine, or was it just the fear of losing his empire? "You allowed it to happen, Elias," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "You stood by and watched as my name was dragged through the mud. You let your nephew steal my work, my legacy. You let me disappear." He winced, the words hitting him like a physical blow. I was wrong, Ilara. Terribly wrong. I see that now. My ambition clouded my judgment. I believed Julian. He was family. And the evidence, it was compelling, manufactured as it clearly was. He looked at the diagrams in his hand, then back at her. "But you saved us, Ilara. You saved the Ascent Tower. You saved Sterling Innovations." The compliment, the acknowledgement, felt hollow. Saving the tower was one thing. Forgiving the past was another entirely. The immediate priority, Ilara stated, her voice regaining its professional tone, pushing down the surge of emotion, is to implement these revisions. The foundation work must be re-evaluated, and the structural steel orders need to be adjusted. It will be costly, and it will delay the project significantly. Sterling nodded, his face grim. Cost is no object. Delays are acceptable. The integrity of the Ascent Tower and the reputation of Sterling Innovations is paramount. You will have full authority, Ilara, whatever you need. The words, full authority, resonated in the room. It was a complete reversal of power, a silent coronation. The other executives watched, their expressions a mixture of awe and trepidation. Ilara Thorne, the janitor, was now in charge, but as she looked at Elias Sterling, at the man who had once been her partner and then her betrayer, she knew this was just the beginning. The tower was one battle. The war for her past, for her identity, for justice, was far from over. And the most difficult confrontation, the one that would truly test her resolve, was still to come. The weight of her re-emerging identity felt heavier than ever, a crown of thorns. The weight of her re-emerging identity, a crown of thorns, pressed down on Ilara as she took her place at the head of the table. The executive chairs, once symbols of unattainable power, now felt like a throne she had reluctantly claimed. The air in the boardroom, still thick with the residue of Julian Thorne's disgrace, crackled with a new, uneasy energy. The other executives, a mix of seasoned veterans and ambitious newcomers, watched her with a blend of awe, suspicion, and a touch of resentment. Some, like Chloe, the junior architect she had quietly helped, looked at her with open admiration, a silent plea for guidance. Others, particularly those who had been Julian's allies or beneficiaries of his patronage, regarded her with cold, calculating eyes, their expressions veiled but hostile. Elias Sterling, having made his pronouncement, had retreated slightly, observing her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He had given her full authority, but she knew it was a conditional trust, born of desperation rather than genuine reconciliation. The path ahead was not just about fixing a building, it was about navigating a treacherous landscape of corporate politics, personal vendettas, and a past that refused to stay buried. "All right," Ilara began, her voice steady, projecting an authority she hadn't felt in years. She placed her revised diagrams on the table, spreading them out for everyone to see. "Here's what we need to do. First, all construction on the Ascent Tower stops immediately. I want a full audit of all materials ordered, especially the structural steel. We need to verify the specifications against these new requirements." She pointed to a section of her drawing. "The core structure needs significant re-engineering. This isn't a simple patch-up, it's a fundamental redesign of the building's spine." She looked up, meeting the eyes of each executive in turn. "I understand this will cause significant delays and incur substantial costs, but the alternative is catastrophic. We will not compromise on safety or integrity." Her gaze lingered on the project manager, a burly man named Frank, who had always seemed to defer to Julian. "Frank, I need you to coordinate with the construction teams. No exceptions. No shortcuts." Frank, initially looking sullen, straightened in his chair. "Yes, Ms. Thorne," he mumbled, a grudging respect entering his tone. Ilara then turned to the head of the legal department. "I need you to review all contracts related to the Ascent Tower. We need to understand the implications of these delays and potential material changes. And I want a full investigation into how these design flaws were overlooked or worse, deliberately concealed." Her eyes flickered towards the door where Julian had exited, a silent promise of accountability. The meeting continued for hours, Ilara taking command with a natural ease that astonished everyone, including herself. It was as if a dormant part of her brain had reawakened, accessing a vast reservoir of knowledge and leadership skills she had thought long gone. She answered questions with precision, offered solutions with clarity, and delegated tasks with an efficiency that left no room for argument. She was Ilara Thorne, the architect, in full command. But beneath the surface, a storm raged. Every technical discussion, every confident pronouncement, was underscored by the searing pain of betrayal, the gnawing fear for Leo, and the suffocating weight of her secret life. She caught Elias Sterling watching her several times, his expression unreadable, a complex mix of admiration and something akin to regret. She wondered if he was thinking of the past, of the woman she had been, and the woman she had become. When the meeting finally adjourned, the room emptied quickly, the executives eager to escape the lingering tension. Only Elias Sterling and Ilara remained. "You were impressive, Ilara," Sterling said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "Just as I remember." Ilara met his eyes, her own eyes tired but firm. "I haven't forgotten how to do my job, Elias, even if you forgot who I was." He flinched, the accusation hitting its mark. "I never forgot your talent, Ilara. Never. But the circumstances, the evidence against you was overwhelming. And Julian, he was so convincing. He swore you had stolen from us, that you had betrayed our trust. And you believed him," Ilara stated, not as a question, but as a cold, hard fact. "You believed your nephew over your partner, over the woman who helped you build this company from the ground up." The words were laced with years of suppressed pain. "I was a fool," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. He looked genuinely remorseful, his shoulders slumped. "A blind, arrogant fool. I allowed my ambition and my family loyalty to cloud my judgment. I destroyed your life, Ilara, and I nearly destroyed my own company in the process." He paused, then looked at her, his eyes pleading. "Can you ever forgive me?" Ilara stared at him, the question hanging heavy in the air. Forgiveness. It was a concept that felt alien, impossible, given the depth of the wound. She thought of the years of struggle, the sacrifices, the constant fear of exposure, all to protect Leo. She thought of the life she had been forced to abandon, the dreams she had buried. "Forgiveness isn't something I can just give, Elias," she said, her voice strained. "It's earned, and a lot of damage has been done. Not just to me, but to my son." His eyes widened slightly. "Your son? You had a child." Ilara nodded, a fresh wave of protectiveness washing over her. "Yes, and his safety, his well-being, has been my absolute priority. That's why I disappeared. That's why I became Ilara Vance. To protect him from the fallout of your choices, of Julian's lies." A look of profound sadness, mixed with a new understanding, crossed Sterling's face. "I see," he murmured. I had no idea. I truly believed you had simply vanished, unable to cope with the accusations." He ran a hand over his face, looking suddenly much older. "What can I do, Ilara, to make this right?" Before Ilara could answer, the boardroom door opened again. Julian Thorne stood there, his eyes red-rimmed, his face a mask of desperate fury. He had clearly been waiting, lurking. "You think you've won, Ilara?" he spat, his voice hoarse. "You think you can just waltz back in here and take everything? My career? My reputation? My uncle's trust?" He took a step into the room, his fists clenched. "You don't know what you're doing. You're a ghost. You belong in the shadows." Elias Sterling stepped forward, placing himself between Ilara and Julian. "Julian, I told you to leave." His voice was low, but laced with a dangerous warning. "No!" Julian screamed, ignoring his uncle. His eyes, filled with a venomous hatred, were fixed on Ilara. "She's a fraud. She always was. A manipulative, backstabbing." "Enough." Ilara's voice, sharp and clear, cut through his tirade. She stood up, her posture radiating a quiet power that dwarfed Julian's frantic rage. "You stole my work, Julian. You lied, you cheated, and you nearly brought down an entire company. You are the fraud, not me. And now, you will face the consequences." Julian stared at her, his face contorted. For a moment, it seemed he might lunge again. But then, his eyes flickered to Elias Sterling, who stood like a silent, formidable wall. Julian's bravado crumbled. He let out a choked sob, a sound of utter defeat, and turned, stumbling out of the room once more, this time with a finality that suggested he wouldn't be returning. The silence that followed was different from before. It was not just shock, but a sense of finality, of a chapter closing. Elias Sterling turned back to Ilara, his expression still etched with remorse. "He will be dealt with," he said, his voice grim. "Properly." Ilara simply nodded. The immediate threat from Julian was gone, but the larger battle remained. She had reclaimed her professional identity, but the personal cost, the risk to Leo, still loomed large. She had stepped out of the shadows, but the light, she knew, could be blinding and dangerous. The past was now fully present, and its demands were far from over. As she looked out at the glittering skyline, at the skeletal frame of the Ascent Tower, she felt a profound sense of isolation. She was back, but at what price? And what new threats would emerge from the wreckage of her past? The silence that settled between Ilara and Elias Sterling after Julian's desperate exit was heavy, pregnant with unspoken history. He will be dealt with. Properly, Sterling had promised, his voice grim. Ilara simply nodded, but the words offered little comfort. Julian's humiliation was a small victory, but it didn't erase the years of pain, nor did it guarantee Leo's safety. The battle for the Ascent Tower was just beginning, and the war for her past, for her peace, was far from over. Sterling cleared his throat, breaking the quiet. Ilara, I know an apology isn't enough, but I want to assure you, you have my full support. Whatever resources you need to fix this, they are yours, and I want to make amends for everything. He looked at her, his gaze earnest, almost pleading. Ilara met his eyes, searching for sincerity. She saw remorse, yes, and a desperate need to salvage his company's reputation. But was it true regret for what he had done to her? She couldn't be sure. The scars ran too deep. My focus is on the tower, Elias, she stated, her voice cool, and on ensuring Leo's safety. Beyond that, we'll see. He nodded, accepting her guarded response. Of course. Let's start with the tower then. What's your immediate plan? For the next few days, Ilara plunged herself into the work with a fierce intensity. The old Ilara Thorne, the brilliant architect, was fully resurrected. She moved through the Sterling Innovations building with a new purpose, no longer a ghost but a commanding presence. Her faded janitor's uniform was replaced by smart, professional attire, though she still felt a strange disconnect, as if she were playing a role. She assembled a new team, hand-picking the most competent and trustworthy individuals from remaining architectural staff. Chloe, the junior architect she had helped, was among the first she selected, recognizing the young woman's sharp mind and genuine dedication. Chloe, in turn, looked at Ilara with a reverence that was both humbling and slightly uncomfortable. The scale of the task was immense. The Ascent Tower, a project already months into construction, now required a complete re-evaluation from its very foundations. Ilara spent hours poring over original blueprints, cross-referencing them with her own revised designs. She conducted site visits, her keen eyes scanning the partially built structure, identifying every point of weakness, every area that needed reinforcement. She held daily meetings, her voice clear and decisive, guiding her team through complex calculations and innovative structural solutions. The initial resistance from some of the older, more traditional engineers quickly dissolved in the face of her undeniable expertise. She spoke their language, not just theoretically, but with an intuitive understanding that surpassed mere academic knowledge. She could visualize the forces at play, the stresses on every beam, the flow of energy through the entire structure. It was a gift, one she had suppressed for far too long. We need to reinforce the central core with a new type of high-tensile steel composite, she explained during one meeting, pointing to a section of her diagram. It will act as a secondary spine, distributing the dynamic load more effectively, especially during lateral stress events like high winds or seismic activity. A veteran engineer, initially skeptical, leaned forward, his brow furrowed in thought. That's audacious, Ms. Thorne, and incredibly expensive, but it just might work. It will work, Ilara stated simply, her gaze unwavering. It's the only way to ensure this building stands for centuries, not just decades. Her days were grueling, stretching late into the night. She would leave Sterling Innovations long after everyone else had gone home, the silence of the empty offices a familiar companion. But now, it was a silence of purpose, not of anonymity. She missed her quiet evenings with Leo, the simple joy of helping him with his homework, of watching him build his intricate creations. One evening, she arrived home utterly exhausted, her mind still buzzing with structural calculations. Leo was already asleep, a half-finished drawing of a fantastical skyscraper on his desk. Ilara sat beside him, her heart aching with a familiar pang of guilt. She was spending less time with him, her attention divided between the demanding resurrection of her career and the fragile peace of their home. She gently picked up his drawing. It was a whimsical, imaginative building, but even in its childish lines, she could see an innate understanding of balance and form. A lump formed in her throat. He was so much like her, so full of potential. And she was risking it all. The next morning, as she was getting ready for work, Leo approached her, his small face serious. "Mom, are you going to be an architect again?" he asked, his eyes wide. Ilara froze, her hand halfway to buttoning her shirt. She hadn't told him the full truth, not yet. How could she explain the complexities of her past, the betrayal, the danger, to a 9-year-old? She had simply told him she was working on a very important project, one that needed her special skills. "Why do you ask, sweetie?" she managed, her voice a little strained. "Because," he said, holding up an old, faded magazine. It was a copy of an architectural journal from years ago, one she thought she had hidden away. On the cover was a picture of a younger Ilara Thorne, smiling confidently, standing beside a model of one of her early, award-winning designs. The headline read, "Ilara Thorne, a visionary for the new millennium." Ilara's breath caught in her throat. She must have missed it when she packed her things years ago. Leo must have found it, tucked away in a forgotten box. "Is this you, Mom?" he asked, his finger tracing her image on the cover. "You look different, like a superhero." Ilara knelt down, pulling him into a tight hug. Her eyes welled up. The truth, the full, undeniable truth, was staring her in the face, not in a corporate boardroom, but in the innocent eyes of her son. The shield she had built around him, around herself, was crumbling, piece by painful piece. "Yes, Leo," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "That's me. A long time ago." He pulled back, his eyes sparkling with a mix of wonder and confusion. "Why didn't you tell me? Why aren't you an architect now?" The questions were simple, direct, and devastating. How could she explain the betrayal, the public humiliation, the forced disappearance? How could she explain that the very man who was now relying on her to save his company was the one who had allowed her life to be shattered? Before she could formulate an answer, her phone buzzed. It was Elias Sterling. "Ilara, we have a problem." His voice was urgent, strained. "The press. They've somehow gotten wind of everything. There are reporters outside the building. They're asking about Julian, about the tower, and about you. Someone leaked your identity." Ilara's blood ran cold. The shield was not just crumbling, it was shattered. The past was not just present, it was public. The danger she had tried so desperately to protect Leo from was now knocking at their door. She looked at her son, his small hand still clutching the magazine with her old face on the cover, his eyes wide with innocent curiosity. Her heart pounded with a new, terrifying fear. The battle for the tower was one thing. The battle for her family's privacy, for Leo's peace, had just begun, and it was far more perilous. The words "someone leaked your identity" echoed in Ilara's ears, cold and sharp, like shards of ice. Her blood ran cold, and the phone felt heavy, threatening to slip from her trembling fingers. She looked at Leo, his small hand still clutching the old magazine, his innocent eyes wide with curiosity, and a wave of raw, visceral fear washed over her. This was the very nightmare she had spent years trying to prevent. "Leo," she said, her voice strained, forcing a calm she didn't feel. "Mommy has to go to work. It's very important. You stay here, okay? With Mrs. Henderson." He nodded, still absorbed by the magazine, oblivious to the storm brewing outside their small apartment. Ilara quickly called Mrs. Henderson, her voice clipped, explaining the need for an urgent, full-day watch. She dressed in a blur, her mind racing, 1,000 worst-case scenarios flashing before her eyes. Who leaked it? Why now? And what would it mean for Leo? Stepping out of her apartment building was like walking into a war zone. A swarm of reporters, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward, descended upon her. "Ms. Thorne, is it true you're Ilara Thorne, the architect who disappeared years ago? Are you working on the Ascent Tower? What about the allegations against Julian Thorne? Where have you been all this time?" The questions came in a relentless barrage, each one a hammer blow against her carefully constructed anonymity. She pushed through them, her face grim, her eyes scanning for any sign of Leo. She saw a few neighbors peering from their windows, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. She felt exposed, vulnerable, her private life suddenly a public spectacle. She finally managed to hail a cab, throwing herself into the back seat, her heart pounding. The drive to Sterling Innovations was a blur of flashing lights and shouted questions from the news vans that followed them. When they arrived, the entrance to the building was besieged. Security guards struggled to hold back the clamoring crowd. Elias Sterling, his face pale and drawn, met her at the door, ushering her quickly inside. "It's a disaster, Ilara," he muttered, leading her through a maze of back corridors to avoid the main lobby. "The news broke an hour ago. Someone sent an anonymous tip to every major network. They have details of the original scandal, your disappearance, everything." "Who?" Ilara demanded, her voice sharp with anger. "Who leaked it?" Sterling shook his head. "We don't know. Our security team is investigating. But the timing, it's clearly malicious, designed to undermine your credibility and, by extension, the company." Ilara's mind immediately went to Julian. He was the most obvious suspect, desperate and vengeful. But could he have orchestrated such a widespread leak so quickly? Or was there someone else, a deeper hand at play? The day at Sterling Innovations was a whirlwind of damage control and crisis management. Ilara held an impromptu press conference, Elias Sterling by her side. She spoke with a calm, measured voice, acknowledging her past identity, confirming her role in fixing the Ascent Tower, and deflecting questions about Julian Thorne with practiced ease. She focused on the facts, on the engineering, on the commitment to safety. She was Ilara Thorne, the professional, the architect. But inside, a raw wound festered. Despite the chaos, Ilara pushed forward with the tower's redesign. She worked tirelessly, fueled by a potent mix of adrenaline and quiet fury. The structural issues were complex, requiring not just technical expertise, but an intuitive understanding of the building's unique geometry. She redesigned load-bearing elements, recalibrated stress points, and integrated new, advanced materials, turning the flawed structure into a true marvel of engineering. Her team, inspired by her unwavering focus, worked alongside her, their admiration palpable. But the media frenzy didn't abate. Her apartment building was staked out by reporters. Paparazzi followed her every move. Leo, despite Mrs. Henderson's best efforts, began to notice. He saw the news reports, his mother's face plastered across every screen. He heard the whispers from other kids at school. One evening, after Ilara had managed to slip past the reporters outside their building, she found Leo sitting on his bed, his small face pale, his eyes troubled. He wasn't building his bridge, he was staring at the television, where a news anchor was discussing the mysterious disappearance of Ilara Thorne. "Mom," he whispered, his voice small, "why are they talking about you? Who are those people outside?" Ilara sat beside him, pulling him close. "They are reporters, sweetie. They are interested in the important work I'm doing." She tried to keep her voice light, but her heart ached. "But they are saying you stole things," he mumbled, his eyes filling with tears. "And that you ran away." The words were a dagger to her heart. This was it, the direct impact she had feared. She held him tighter, fighting back her own tears. "Leo, listen to me," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. "None of that is true. I never stole anything. I never ran away because I did something wrong. I left to protect you, to keep us safe." She looked into his eyes, trying to convey the depth of her love and the truth of her sacrifice. Sometimes, grown-ups do bad things, and they try to hurt other people. And I had to make a very hard choice to keep us out of harm's way. But I promise you, I did nothing wrong. And I will always, always protect you. He looked at her, searching her face, and slowly his tears subsided. He wrapped his arms around her neck, burying his face in her shoulder. "Okay, Mom," he whispered. "I believe you." His simple trust was a balm to her wounded soul, but it also intensified her resolve. She would not let anyone hurt him, not again. The next day, a new, more sinister element emerged. A series of anonymous emails began circulating within Sterling Innovations, and then, inexplicably, to a few key media outlets. They contained manipulated documents, old, discredited reports and distorted fragments of her past, all designed to paint her as unstable, unreliable, and a danger to the company. The narrative was clear. She was not a returning hero, but a liability, a ticking time bomb. Elias Sterling called her into his office, his face grim. "Ilara, these emails, they are vicious, and they are clearly designed to discredit you, to make people doubt your capabilities, your sanity." He pushed a tablet across the desk, showing her a particularly nasty email. It contained a doctored image of her, looking disheveled, with a caption suggesting mental instability. Ilara's stomach churned. This was a direct attack, more personal and insidious than the initial leak. Someone was not just trying to expose her, they were trying to destroy her, again. And the timing, just as she was making significant progress on the tower, was no coincidence. "This isn't Julian," Ilara said, her voice low. "He's too clumsy for this. This is someone else. Someone with a deeper agenda." She thought of the original scandal, the carefully orchestrated campaign against her. It had been too sophisticated for Julian alone. Even then, there had always been whispers of a shadowy figure, a puppet master pulling the strings. Sterling nodded slowly. "My thoughts exactly. This feels familiar, like the old days." His eyes met hers, a silent acknowledgement of the past, of the forces that had once conspired against her. "We need to find out who is behind this, Ilara, before they do irreparable damage." As she left Sterling's office, the weight of a new threat settled over her. The battle for the Ascent Tower was now intertwined with a deeper, more dangerous war. Someone was trying to silence her, to push her back into the shadows, perhaps permanently. And this time, they weren't just attacking her career, they were attacking her very sanity, her credibility, and by extension, her ability to protect Leo. The stakes had just risen exponentially, and Ilara knew, with chilling certainty, that her greatest challenge, the true architect of her past misery, was finally revealing themselves. The chilling certainty that her greatest challenge, the true architect of her past misery, was finally revealing themselves, settled over Ilara like a shroud. The anonymous emails, the doctored images, the insidious whispers of instability, this wasn't Julian's clumsy revenge. This was the work of a master manipulator, someone who understood the subtle art of destruction. Someone who had orchestrated her downfall years ago. Ilara walked out of Elias Sterling's office, her jaw set. The fear for Leo was a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now tempered by a burning resolve. She would not be broken again. She would not let them win. She immediately contacted Sterling's head of cybersecurity, a quiet, brilliant woman named Dr. Anya Sharma. Ilara explained the pattern, the subtle nuances of the attack, the way it mirrored the tactics used against her years ago. Anya listened intently, her eyes sharp and intelligent. "This is sophisticated, Ms. Thorne," Anya confirmed after a preliminary analysis. "Not just a random hack. It's targeted, personal, and designed to dismantle your reputation from the inside out. It suggests an intimate knowledge of your past and of Sterling Innovations' internal systems." Over the next few days, while Ilara continued her relentless work on the Ascent Tower, Anya and her team worked tirelessly, tracing the digital breadcrumbs. The pressure was immense. The media, fueled by the anonymous leaks, painted a picture of a company in crisis led by a reclusive, possibly unstable architect. Investor confidence wavered. The project, despite Ilara's rapid progress, teetered on the brink of collapse. Ilara, however, refused to yield. She held firm, her focus unwavering. She knew the only way to silence the noise was to deliver results, to prove her competence beyond a shadow of a doubt. She pushed her team to their limits, inspiring them with her sheer dedication and unshakable belief in the project. The re-engineered core of the Ascent Tower began to take shape, a testament to her vision and resilience. One afternoon, Anya called Ilara and Elias Sterling into a secure conference room. Her face was grim, her voice low. "We found them. The source of the leaks, the emails, the entire smear campaign." She projected a complex network diagram onto the screen. It was an external server, but the access points, the digital fingerprints, they led us to a single individual. Anya paused, her eyes meeting Sterling's, then Ilara's. "The architect who replaced you, Ms. Thorne, after your departure. Marcus Thorne. Ilara gasped, a sharp, involuntary sound. Marcus Thorne, Julian's father. Elias Sterling's older brother. The name was a phantom, a whisper from her deepest nightmares. He had been a silent, powerful presence in the company during her early years, a man who had always seemed to resent her rapid rise, her close partnership with Elias. He had been the one who had subtly undermined her, planting seeds of doubt, whispering in the shadows. He was the puppet master. Elias Sterling's face went white. Marcus, my brother. His voice was barely a whisper, laced with shock and profound betrayal. He never wanted you to succeed, Ilara, Anya explained, her voice devoid of emotion. He saw you as a threat to the Thorne family legacy, to Julian's eventual ascension. He orchestrated the entire scandal years ago, fabricating evidence, manipulating witnesses. He used Julian as a pawn, knowing his nephew's ambition would make him compliant. And when you returned, when you threatened to expose everything, he reactivated his old network, doubling down on his efforts to destroy you. The revelation was a punch to the gut, but also a strange kind of relief. The shadowy antagonist, the unseen hand, finally had a face. The pieces of her past, the inexplicable cruelty, the relentless campaign against her, finally clicked into place. He's been working from the shadows, Anya continued, using shell companies and offshore accounts to fund his operations. He planned to take control of Sterling Innovations once you and Elias were both discredited, positioning Julian as the savior of the company. Elias Sterling stood up, his face a mask of fury and heartbreak. My own brother. All these years. He looked at Ilara, his eyes filled with a new depth of remorse. He destroyed your life, Ilara, and I let him. I was blind. He won't destroy it again, Ilara said, her voice cold and resolute. And he won't destroy this company. The confrontation with Marcus Thorne was swift and brutal. Elias, consumed by a righteous fury, personally confronted his brother, armed with Anya's irrefutable evidence. Marcus, cornered and exposed, crumbled. The full extent of his decades-long manipulation, his calculated sabotage, and his ruthless ambition came to light. He was arrested, facing a litany of charges, including corporate espionage, fraud, and defamation. Julian Thorne, implicated in his father's schemes, faced his own legal repercussions, his career and reputation irrevocably shattered. The news of Marcus Thorne's arrest sent shockwaves through the industry. The media narrative shifted dramatically. Ilara Thorne, the mysterious, unstable architect, was suddenly hailed as a hero, a victim of a ruthless corporate conspiracy, and the true savior of the Ascent Tower. The public, always eager for compelling narrative, embraced the story with fervor. With the external threats neutralized, Ilara focused entirely on the tower. She worked with a renewed sense of purpose, her every decision precise, her every instruction clear. The Ascent Tower, once a symbol of impending disaster, was transformed. Its re-engineered core, its strengthened foundations, and its elegant, resilient design became a testament to Ilara's unwavering vision. She oversaw every detail, ensuring that not a single flaw remained. Months later, the Ascent Tower stood tall and proud, a gleaming beacon against the New York skyline. It was more than just a building. It was a monument to resilience, to justice, and to the indomitable spirit of a woman who refused to be silenced. On the day of the grand unveiling, the atmosphere was electric. Dignitaries, investors, and media flocked to the site. Elias Sterling, his face beaming with pride and profound gratitude, introduced Ilara Thorne to the assembled crowd. This woman, he declared, his voice ringing with emotion, is the true visionary behind the Ascent Tower. She built this company with me, and she saved it. She is not just an architect. She is a force of nature. And she is, and always will be, the heart of Sterling Innovations. Ilara stood on the podium, looking out at the glittering city, at the tower she had saved. She saw the faces of her team, their eyes filled with respect. She saw Elias Sterling, his gaze holding a deep, genuine remorse and admiration. And then, her eyes found him. Leo. He stood in the front row, beside Mrs. Henderson, his small face alight with pride. He wasn't holding the old magazine anymore. Instead, he held a miniature model of the Ascent Tower, meticulously crafted from Legos, his own small masterpiece. He caught her eye, and a wide, unadulterated smile spread across his face. He gave her a thumbs up, his hero. A warmth spread through Ilara's chest, a feeling more profound than any professional accolade. She had protected him. She had shown him what it meant to fight for truth, to stand tall against injustice. Her life was no longer a shadow. She was Ilara Thorne, the architect, the mother, the survivor. She had reclaimed her identity, her legacy, and her peace. The Ascent Tower stood as a testament to her genius, but Leo's smile, his unwavering belief, was her true masterpiece. She had faced the past, conquered her fears, and emerged stronger, ready to build a future, not just of steel and glass, but of unwavering truth and boundless love. The janitor had raised a hand, and in doing so, she had rebuilt her entire world.